You are listening to HOA Citation Circus. The HOA tried to weaponize a property line. This is not getting ignored. Martha pointed at a tiny nail head sticking out of my fence post and yelled that exposed nails were a violation and she would fine me daily. I stared at her. The nail was barely visible. It held a bracket for the string line my contractor had just stretched to mark the setback. She stood there in her red windbreaker with her handheld radio clipped to her belt like she was dispatch for the neighborhood police, rain dripping off her visor, and told me I had 24 hours to remove the entire setup or she would issue a stop work order and fine me $200 per day until compliance. I am a property appraiser in Boise, Idaho. I know what liens do to value. I had just bought this house in Magnolia Heights HOA 3 months ago, and I was in the middle of replacing a rotted fence that the previous owner had let fall apart. My contractor was scheduled for a tight morning window, and if Martha stopped the work, I would pay a $1,500 cancellation fee plus rescheduling costs that could push the job back weeks. The renovation schedule was tight. Delays could cost me thousands in overlapping contractor commitments and lost time on the appraisal I was supposed to finish for a client. Martha crossed her arms. I decide what counts as compliant, not you. She said it like she was reading from a script she had memorized. I asked her which rule covered exposed nails. She did not answer. She just pulled out her phone and took a photo of the nail, then walked to the next post and took another photo of a screw that was flush but apparently offensive. I asked again. She ignored me and kept photographing. My neighbor 2 houses down was watering his lawn. He paused mid-spray to stare. Martha turned and waved at him like she was the mayor. He did not wave back. He just stood there with the hose in his hand and the water pooling around his feet. I called my contractor. He was in the truck at the curb waiting for me to give him the go-ahead to start digging post holes. I told him to hold. He sighed and said he had another job lined up for noon, and if we did not start soon he would have to leave. Martha heard me on the phone and smiled. She told me she would be back tomorrow to inspect for compliance, and if the string line was still up she would issue the fine immediately. I pulled the nail. It took 30 seconds. Martha stood there watching me with her arms crossed the entire time. When I finished, she said the string line was still a violation because it created a trip hazard and implied construction without a permit. I told her I had the permit. She said the permit did not cover preparatory work. I asked her to show me that rule. She said she did not need proof, she had paperwork and vibes. That line stuck with me. Paperwork and vibes. I wrote it down on my phone as soon as she walked away. I called a real estate agent I knew from work. His name was Greg, and he had sold me the house. I asked him about fence rules in Magnolia Heights. He groaned. He told me Martha Evans was the vendor coordinator for the HOA and she had a reputation for threatening contractors and service techs to keep them from working in the neighborhood, unless they paid her a kickback or got her approval first. He said she had run off 2 landscaping crews in the past year by filing bogus complaints with the city. He warned me that if I let her put a lien on my property, it would show up in disclosures and kill my resale value. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called a surveyor. The surveyor came out that afternoon. His name was Tom, and he drove a white truck with a county seal on the door and a laser level mounted in the bed. He spent an hour walking my property line with a tablet and a tripod. Martha appeared halfway through. She stood on the sidewalk and yelled at him that he was trespassing on HOA common area. Tom did not even look up. He just kept working. She called the police. The police showed up 20 minutes later. 2 officers. One of them walked over to Tom and asked what he was doing. Tom showed him the permit and the work order. The officer nodded and walked back to Martha. He told her the surveyor had every right to be there, and if she called again without cause she could be cited for misuse of emergency services. Martha said the HOA owned the easement. The officer asked her to show him the plat. She did not have it. He left. Tom finished the survey. He handed me a printout with the boundary marked in red. My property line was 6 inches farther out than the old fence posts. The setback rule Martha kept quoting required fences to be 3 feet inside the property line. My new fence would be exactly 3 feet inside. Tom circled the measurement on the printout and told me to keep it safe. He said HOAs hate surveys because they prove who is lying. I nodded like I was losing, because I wanted her to get comfortable. That night I found a bright orange violation door hanger on my front door. It had the HOA logo at the top and a checklist of violations. Someone had checked the boxes for unauthorized construction, non-compliant fencing, and failure to submit plans. At the bottom it said I had 72 hours to remove all construction materials and restore the property to original condition or face escalating fines starting at $200 per day. I checked my security camera. The timestamp showed Martha hanging the notice at 11:30 at night. She was wearing the same red windbreaker and visor. She stood on my porch for a full minute looking at the camera, then she walked around the side of the house toward the back fence line. I watched the side yard camera feed. She stopped at the survey stakes Tom had left and pulled one out of the ground. She looked around, then put it back in the wrong spot, about a foot closer to my house. She did the same thing to 2 more stakes before she left. I saved the video to 3 separate drives. The next morning I got a letter from an attorney. It was on thick paper with a law firm name I had never heard of. The letter said I was in violation of multiple HOA covenants, and that the association reserved the right to pursue immediate legal action including injunctive relief, fines, liens, and attorney fees if I did not cease all construction and submit a compliance plan within 48 hours. The tone was aggressive. It was designed to scare me into paying instantly. I called the law firm. The receptionist told me they did not represent Magnolia Heights HOA. She said someone had used their letterhead without permission and they were investigating. I asked her to send me that confirmation in writing. She did. I called the HOA management company. The local rep was a guy named Derek who sounded like he had heard this script 100 times. He told me Martha was within her rights to issue violations and that I needed to work with her to resolve the issue. I asked him if the HOA had adopted a fence rule that covered setback measurements. He said yes. I asked him to send me a copy. He said he would email it. The email never came. I filed a records request with the management company. Idaho law requires HOAs to provide governing documents within 10 business days. I asked for the fence rule, the violation policy, the enforcement procedure, and any correspondence related to my property. I also asked for records of all fines issued in the past 2 years, and the names of residents who had received them. Derek called me back an hour later. He said I was being hostile and that records requests were only for serious legal matters. I told him I was a property appraiser and I knew how disclosures worked. He hung up. 2 days later, I got a second violation notice. This one was taped to my mailbox. It said I had failed to comply with the first notice and that fines were now active at $200 per day retroactive to the original notice date. It also said the HOA was forwarding my case to the County Code Enforcement Office for permit review. I called the county. The code enforcement officer told me there was no complaint on file for my address. I asked her if the HOA had called. She checked. No record. I thanked her and asked her to note in my file that I had inquired. She said she would. Greg called me that afternoon. He said he had been talking to other neighbors and 3 of them had similar stories about Martha. One guy had been fined for parking his work truck in his own driveway. Another had been threatened with a lien for painting his house a shade of tan that was 2% darker than the approved palette. A third had been told his vegetable garden was non-compliant and had to be removed. None of them had fought it. They had all just paid. Greg asked me what I was going to do. I told him I was going to finish my fence and let her keep digging. The contractor came back. His name was Luis, and he had been in the business for 20 years. I showed him the survey and the violation notices. He shook his head. He said he had worked in Magnolia Heights before and Martha had tried to shake him down for a cash payment to approve his work. He had refused, and she had called the city 3 times with complaints about noise, debris, and unsafe practices. None of them stuck. He told me he would do the job, but I needed to understand that she was going to make it hell. We started digging post holes. Luis had a crew of 2 guys with an auger. The machine was loud. Martha showed up within 10 minutes. She parked her car at the curb and got out with her clipboard and her handheld radio. She walked onto my property without asking and stood directly behind the auger while it was running. Luis shut it off. He told her she needed to leave the work area for safety. She said she was conducting an inspection. He told her she had no authority. She called someone on the radio. I assumed it was Derek. Derek did not show up. Martha stood there for another 20 minutes taking photos of every hole we dug. She measured each one with a tape measure she pulled from her pocket. She wrote notes on her clipboard. When Luis tried to set the first post, she stepped in front of him and said the hole was not compliant. He asked her what that meant. She said the depth was incorrect. He showed her the building code requirement. She said the HOA had a stricter standard. He asked her to show him the rule. She said she did not need to. Luis looked at me. I told him to keep working. He did. Martha pulled out her phone and called the police again. This time she told them we were conducting unpermitted construction and creating a public hazard. The officer who responded was the same one from the survey visit. He remembered me. He asked Martha if she had any evidence of a permit violation. She said the HOA had not approved the work. He told her that HOA approval was not the same as a building permit and that I had already shown him my permit. He left. Martha got in her car and drove away. I thought that was the end of it. It was not. If you are enjoying this HOA chaos, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where the bad guys do not win. That night I got an email from Derek. It said the HOA board had held an emergency meeting and voted to impose an immediate stop work order on my property pending a hearing. The email said I was required to attend the hearing in 3 days, and that failure to attend would result in automatic penalties including fines, liens, and legal action. It also said I was prohibited from continuing any construction until the hearing was concluded, and the board issued a written decision. I called Greg. He told me emergency meetings required 48 hours notice to all residents and that votes taken without proper notice were invalid. I asked him how he knew. He said he had been on the board 2 years ago and had quit because Martha kept bypassing the rules. I replied to Derek and told him the meeting was invalid. He did not respond. I kept working. Luis and his crew finished setting the posts. We poured concrete and let it cure overnight. The next morning we started attaching the fence panels. They were cedar, 6 feet tall, with a clean vertical design that matched the neighborhood aesthetic exactly. Every measurement was perfect. Every post was plumb. The fence was 3 feet inside my property line just like the rule required. Martha showed up with a camera crew, not a news crew, a guy with a handheld camera who looked like he had been hired off Craigslist. She stood on the sidewalk and filmed the entire installation while narrating into her handheld radio like she was documenting a crime scene. She said things like unauthorized construction in progress and non-compliant materials being installed. The camera guy looked uncomfortable. He kept glancing at me like he wanted to apologize. I waved at the camera. Martha posted the video on the neighborhood Facebook group that night. The post said I was violating HOA rules and endangering property values. She included photos of the fence and close-ups of the survey stakes. She claimed the surveyor had used incorrect measurements and that the fence was encroaching on common area. She said she was filing a formal complaint with the county and that residents should be aware of rogue homeowners who refuse to follow the rules. The post got 43 comments. Most of them were supportive of me. People started sharing their own stories about Martha. One woman said Martha had fined her for having a wreath on her door in July. Another said Martha had tried to force him to remove a bird feeder because it attracted wildlife. A third said Martha had threatened to tow his car because it was parked on the street for more than 24 hours even though there was no rule against it. Greg commented with a link to Idaho HOA law and a reminder that selective enforcement was illegal. Martha deleted his comment. He posted it again. She blocked him. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday night at 7 p.m. in the clubhouse. I showed up 15 minutes early with a folder full of documents. I had the survey, the permit, the violation notices, the fake attorney letter, the security camera footage, the email from the law firm, and the records request response that Derek had never sent. I also had a printed copy of Idaho Code Title 55 Chapter 15, which governs HOA enforcement procedures. The clubhouse was a small room with a folding table and 10 plastic chairs. 5 board members sat on one side of the table. Martha sat at the far end. Derek sat next to her with a laptop. There were 4 other residents in the audience. I recognized 2 of them from the Facebook comments. The board president was a retired accountant named Bill. He opened the meeting by reading a prepared statement about HOA rules and the importance of compliance. He said the board took violations seriously, and that my failure to cooperate had forced them to take action. He asked Martha to present her case. Martha stood up. She had a stack of printed photos and a typed report. She said I had installed a fence without HOA approval. She said the fence violated setback rules, height restrictions, and design standards. She said I had ignored multiple violation notices and had been hostile to HOA representatives. She said the surveyor I had hired was not licensed and that his measurements were fraudulent. She said I owed the HOA $800 in fines plus attorney fees. I waited for her to finish. Then I raised my hand. Bill nodded at me. I stood up and walked to the table. I opened my folder and pulled out the survey. I handed it to Bill. I told him the surveyor was licensed by the state and that his measurements were certified. I showed him the permit. I showed him the violation notices with the timestamps. I showed him the security camera footage of Martha moving the survey stakes. The room went quiet. Bill looked at Martha. She said the video was edited. I told him I had the raw file and I could provide it to an independent expert if needed. Martha said I was lying. I pulled out my phone and played the video on the screen. The timestamp was clear. The motion was clear. Bill watched it twice. One of the other board members asked Martha if she had moved the stakes. She said she was conducting an inspection. He asked her why she did it at night. She did not answer. I pulled out the fake attorney letter. I told the board that someone had used a law firm's letterhead without permission to threaten me. I handed them the email from the law firm confirming it was fraudulent. Derek turned red. Bill asked him if he had sent the letter. Derek said Martha had given it to him. Martha said she had received it from a lawyer friend. Bill asked for the lawyer's name. She said she did not remember. I pulled out the records request response. I told the board I had asked for the fence rule 3 times and had never received it. Derek said he had sent it. I asked him to show me the email. He could not find it. I asked Bill if the board had adopted a fence rule that covered setback measurements. Bill looked confused. He asked Derek to pull up the rules. Derek opened his laptop and scrolled through a PDF. He stopped. He looked at Martha. He said the rule she had been citing was never formally adopted. The page in the document was blank, except for a heading that said Fence and Landscaping Standards. Bill asked Martha how long she had been enforcing a rule that did not exist. She said the rule was implied. He said that was not how HOAs worked. Another board member asked if there were other residents who had been fined under the fake rule. Martha said she did not keep records. Bill asked Derek. Derek said he would have to review the files. I pulled out Greg's list of other violations. I read the names and the fines. Bill looked at Martha. He asked her if she had issued those violations. She said yes. He asked her under what authority. She said she was the vendor coordinator and it was her job to maintain standards. He told her that vendor coordinators do not issue violations. Bill called a recess. The board went into a side room. They were gone for 20 minutes. When they came back, Bill said the board was suspending all active fines against me and launching an internal review of enforcement procedures. He said Martha would not be issuing any violations until the review was complete. He said the board would vote on new hearing rules at the next meeting to ensure residents could not be railroaded. Martha stood up. She tried to interrupt. Bill told her to sit down. She kept talking. He called for a vote. The board voted 4-1 to proceed with the review. Martha was the only no vote. She slammed her clipboard on the table and walked out. The hearing ended. Bill apologized to me. He said the board had not been aware of the extent of the issue and that they took selective enforcement seriously. He said I could finish my fence without interference. I thanked him and left. The next morning I got an email from the management company regional supervisor. Her name was Linda and she said she had been copied on the hearing summary. She asked me to send her all my documentation. I sent her everything. 2 days later she called me. She said Derek had been reassigned and that the company was conducting a compliance audit of Magnolia Heights HOA. She said she had reviewed the fake attorney letter and the security camera footage, and that Martha had been removed from the vendor coordinator role pending an investigation. I went back to the City Code Enforcement Office. I asked the officer if the HOA had the authority to enforce setback rules. She pulled up the code. She said setback enforcement was a city function and that HOAs could only enforce aesthetic rules. She said if an HOA claimed jurisdiction over setbacks, they were overstepping. I asked her to put that in writing. She did. I added it to my file. 3 weeks later, I got a certified letter from Linda. It said the HOA compliance audit had found multiple instances of improper enforcement, selective fining, and procedural violations. It said the board had voted to retract all fines issued under unadopted rules. It said Martha had been required to send written retraction letters to every resident she had fined under the fake fence rule. The letter included a copy of Martha's retraction. It was 1 paragraph. It said the violations were issued in error and that no further action would be taken. I framed it. The fence was finished. It was perfect. Luis took photos for his portfolio. My neighbor with the hose came over and told me it looked great. He said he was thinking about replacing his fence too and asked for Luis's number. I gave it to him. Greg stopped by with a bottle of bourbon. He said he had heard about the hearing from 3 different people and that the neighborhood group chat was still talking about it. He said Martha had stopped posting on Facebook and that someone had filed a formal complaint with the board about her nighttime property inspections. He said the police had been called twice in the past week for trespassing complaints against her. I asked him what happened to her. He said she resigned from the board. He said the management company had issued a formal trespass notice banning her from my property after I filed a police report about the survey stakes. He said she tried to appeal it, but the board upheld it. He said she moved out of Magnolia Heights 2 months later. I asked him where she went. He said he did not know and he did not care. The board adopted new hearing rules at the next meeting. Residents could no longer be fined without a written notice that included the specific rule citation and a timeline for appeal. Emergency meetings required 48 hours notice and could not result in immediate penalties. Violation notices had to be signed by a board member, not a coordinator. The rules passed unanimously. I kept the survey and the camera footage. I kept the fake attorney letter and the retraction. I kept every email and every violation notice. I put them all in a binder and labeled it HOA file. I still have it. My property value did not drop. It went up. The fence added curb appeal, and the new hearing rules made Magnolia Heights a more attractive place to live. Greg sold 2 houses in the neighborhood that summer, and both buyers mentioned the improved HOA transparency as a selling point. I finished my renovation on schedule. No more delays, no more threats, no more orange door hangers. I will catch you again soon.